Okay, what we're going to do now is restore the caching that we had in place earlier before we implemented pagination and filtering and sorting. And what we want to make sure is that when we click on a user, obviously, we retrieve the user from cache, and when we go back to our results, then if we've already loaded them, then we're going to want to get that from memory. But things are more complicated now, because if I apply a filter and I select males, then we need to remember this query. If I select the second page of males, we need to remember this query and what was stored inside this specific query when we got it back from our server. It's no longer as simple as just remembering an array of members, because we need to make sure that if a user's asked for page 2 of males, and even if they ask for the age and said, for instance, 18 to 40, we want to remember the results of what is stored inside here, inside our service. So things get a bit more complicated. But we're going to take this nice and slowly. We're going to go through it step by step to see what we need to do. And first of all, head back to VS Code and let's straight away go to our member service, because this is where we're going to be configuring what we're doing here. So we're going to start with our get members. What do we know? What information do we currently have that we could use? Because for each one of these different types of query, whether we're getting a list of females or a list of males, then all of the information that we get to specify what type of query this is, what we're going to be sending up to our API, is stored inside this user params. Each one of these queries is going to be unique. But if a user asks for all of the males, then the user params are always going to be identical for that particular query. So what we can use is use this user params as some kind of key, and then for each key, each query, we can store the response. So what we can use, and let's take a look at what we'll use as our key first of all. So I'm just going to add a console.log. And then what we'll do, because the user params is an object, we can use the objects.values, and then we can pass in user params. And what we'll use is the join method, and we'll join each value by a dash. And if we go take a look at our browser and go back to the console, then each time that we click on a query, in this case 189915 last active female, and if I click on males and press return, then we see another key that we could use, last active male, and we could store these results with this particular key. And if this request is repeated, then we're going to store what's inside the response from those results. And if we click on newest members, then we see another key that we can use. And this is the idea. We're just going to use keys, and then we're going to have values. And inside the values is going to be the response that we get back from the API. And let's go and see how we're going to use this to implement our new caching. So when we want to store something with a key and value, a good thing to use is a map. And a map is like a dictionary really. And what we'll call it is member cache. And we're going to set this equal to a new map. Simple as that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check, I'll just remove this console.log now that we have the idea of what we're doing. And what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if we have in our cache the results of that particular query. So what we'll do is we'll say var response equals, and we'll say list.memberCache, and then when we're using a map we can set and we can get from this, and we store everything with a key. So what we can do is we can use the same key that we use to set as we use to get. So in this case I'm going to say object.values, and we're going to pass in our user params, and then I'm going to say join, and use the same method. I'm just going to use a dash to say, yep, this is the key. And then if we have a response in our cache, then we can return it just as we did earlier. And we'll say if we do have a response for that key, then what we're going to do is return of and then pass in a response. And then what we do when we get our results back, what we'll do inside our return this get paginated result, and this is returning an observable of paginated result of member array. So we know what we're returning, and what we do inside here, because it's an observable, we need to use the pipe, and then inside here we can use the map method, and this is an RxJS map, and this is where things get slightly confusing because we're using a map object here, and you can think of this as a kind of dictionary. It stores values in key value format. So our key is going to be what we get here that we were looking at in the console, and the value is going to be the response we get back from our server. So what we'll do is we'll use the map function, and we use this to transform the data that we get back. So we'll use response, and we'll have hold of the response inside here. And then what we can do is say list.membercache.set, and we'll use the same key, so we're just going to use the same method and say object.values, and we'll pass in the user params, and then we can say join, and then we can specify the dash for its key, and then what we're going to set this to, the value. So when we use set, we give it a key, which we've done here, and then we specify the value, and the value is going to be our response. And then we're going to return the response. Oh, and this is all grayed out, but I've missed off the period here, which is very important. We need to use a dot and then pipe. That's why it was giving me a sort of grayed out response. This is how we should have it. So the idea is that we go to our API, we go and get our members if we don't have them in our cache, but if we do have them in our cache and the query is identical, then we just retrieve this from our cache. Let's go take a look and see how we're doing. So I'll just close the browser there. So let's say I wanted to get the list of males and I apply filters. We don't have that in our cache. We have to go to our API. If we then go back and get our list of females, boom, we have them now because that query with that key is stored in our cache. If we go and get newest members, we don't have this. We have to go and get them. But our last active should be stored in our cache, and now when we switch between them, then we can see it's instant. If I then change the date to, let's say I want to get users up to the age of 60 and press return, again we have to go to the API, but then if I reset filters, then we've already got that data in our cache. Now, obviously if I change the age to anything other than 60, then I'm going to have to go to the API again. But if I make the same request and I apply filters, then we get the instant response. And what we should also be able to do is go to the very specific page. So I'm going to make a change to demonstrate this, and we're going to go to our user params first of all. And just so that we can see what's going on clearly, I'm just going to specify a page size of 2 and save this and go back to the browser. So we're always going to have 2. And I'm going to show the males because there's more of them in my version of this app. So what we have now is 2 users per page, but we've got 7 found, and therefore we've got 4 pages of results. If I go to page 3, we'll have to load, but if I go back to 1, we've got it in memory. If we go to page 2, we have to load, but now page 1, 2, and 3 have all been stored in our cache, and if we click on 4, then we get taken to the 4th page, but now we've got all of our different members back, and they're stored in memory. So that's how we deal with the members. And I'm going to reset the page size to 5. Now that we've seen that's okay, I'm just going to go back to how it was before. We reload our members because we no longer have them in memory, because we've refreshed the browser, and if we have to click on things, then of course we're going to be loading until such time as we do have it in our memory. So now what we need to look at is how do we deal with the individual user. And it's a bit more complicated now because we don't just have an array of members, we've now got a map that stores key value pairs, and we need to extract a member out of there if we've got it in the cache. And we'll take a look at how we can do that next.